a void of my own creation, an 8.25 gram mushroom and 50 mg THC trip report sent in by a subscriber. To preface, I'll be writing in present tense as things happen up until the point of onset, and once I begin writing in past tense, it is from the post-trip perspective, though I may still try and write as the trip progresses. It's a beautiful morning. I usually try and sleep in on the weekends that I don't have my 2-year-old, but I always wake up early anyway, with today being no exception, as I awoke at 6:50 AM. Today is Friday, May 26, 2023, and I've decided to mark the occasion for the trip I'll be taking today by writing my first trip report. As a writer and psychonaut, it only makes sense to give it a shot, right? Here's a little bit about me. I'm 25 years old living in Phoenix, Arizona, and up until July 2022, I'd never experienced a psychedelic. I've always been a deeply spiritual person, so it has intrigued me, but I never had the opportunity to try anything until then. So I first started this trek into psychedelia last July, taking 1 gram of psilocybe cubensis with 1 10 mg THC edible, with that night being solidified as one of the top 3 most amazing experiences of my life to date, and I became instantaneously fixated on building up my dosage to experience true ego death. First, it was 1 gram, then 0.5, 0.7, 1.25, 1.65, 2, 2.25, 2.5, 2.75, and 3 grams, all with various levels of THC being consumed. And at the time of this writing, my largest dose to date is 4 grams, taken exactly 2 weeks ago today. I decided that for today's trip, I would jump up to 8.25 grams with 50 mg of THC edibles. In all honesty, I was expecting 3 grams and 4 grams to be as transformative as my very first psychedelic experience last year, but it's come up short, even though I did begin experiencing ego dissolution at 4 grams. From this point on, I'll be describing the trip in past tense, as it took me some time to completely recollect everything that happened. I was planning to consume the mushrooms and edibles at 9:30 PM, but at about 8:30, and even after meditating and setting the intention, I began to feel acute anxiety due to the realization that I would be taking a megadose for the first time alone. I asked a very close friend if she would come be my trip sitter, and she agreed. I explained what my intention was, and that I planned to deprive my senses and go lie down naked in the dark once the trip began, but I'd still hang out with her for as long as I could prior. These would be crucially beneficial decisions to have shared the plan with her, even though the trip would come to bloom before I even made it to my bed. After measuring out the full 8.25 grams, I began to dread the inevitably horrible taste of the mushrooms. To get around this, I put the entire dosage into a food processor and ground the mushrooms down to a fine powder. To my surprise, it still ended up tasting absolutely terrible, even after mixing it all with Nesquik chocolate powder and whole milk. The chocolate milk definitely covered a world of hurt though. I would then follow this up with the THC edibles all in one go. After chasing the silo chocolate milk and edibles with water and Sprite, I stripped naked and laid down on the couch. My trip sitter did not mind my nudity. We are intimately familiar with each other. She sat at my desk and we hung out talking, waiting excitedly. Only 15 minutes had passed when the euphoria began to creep into my body, slithering up my legs and into my chest, then filling my whole body in a matter of minutes. I could barely move. I was already so blissfully euphoric, to the point that I was dissociating due to it. My sitter noticed the change in my demeanour as I sank into the couch catatonically, staring up at the ceiling. She started asking me about how I was feeling. I remember being caught off guard by how rapidly the trip was beginning to happen, not even 20 minutes following consumption. Just after the 24-minute mark, the popcorn ceiling above me began shifting into a massive mandala that spanned the entire ceiling's surface, undulating with deep calm. It felt as if it were there the whole time, and was only waiting for me to notice it before the true trip began. Once the entire shape formed, the popcorn texturing began to sway like upside-down grass affected by non-existent wind, moving in all different directions and getting taller and shorter, while also sliding across the ceiling like tiles, tessellating. I picked up my phone to reply to a text to find the phone pulsing, with each pulse moving down into my hand and arm right up to my shoulder, like a heartbeat with only one thump. Then, inexplicably, I started to cry. First a quiet sob, then ugly crying into a full-blown weep. All these repressed emotions and buried feelings about my failed marriage and my insecurities about being a good father, son, brother, friend, person, musician had come to the surface. And I realised now that that was the first time I had even truly cried since I got divorced last year. It felt like the tears couldn't stop, like they'd been wanting to come out for so long that once there was an opportunity, they were running for the hills. My sitter came over and embraced me and let me hold her while I wept, consoling me. Although I don't recall speaking, she said I would whimper things like, "I just want to be a good dad. I miss my mum and dad. I miss my sister. I just want to be a good person. I hope I'm a good man." And she said she reassured me whenever I said those things. By the time I began crying, the time dilation was in full swing, and I was convinced I had been crying for years on end. I was the most exhausted I'd ever been, but she said that I cried for only 15 to 20 minutes or so, even though I thought I'd cried my way into my 80s. It was during the crying that I began having such intense visual aberrations that I was completely blind and deaf, only able to see with my mind's eye, and being unable to use my eyes and ears whatsoever. I was locked inside my head, even though my sitter said I was laughing and communicating with her like normal after the crying. I still have no recollection of any conversations we'd had for the next 5 hours or so. I was lost in a void of my own creation. At some point, she helped me transition into my bedroom, and I do recall sitting on the floor between my dresser and bed, which is a very tight space and just barely wide enough for me to fit. I was in an upright fetal position, but I still couldn't see or hear the outside world, only the inside of me and the tetrachrome tapestries in my mind. It was here I realised I was trapped in a loop. I'm unable to recall exactly what I was saying or what was happening in the loop, but I distinctly remember feeling like the AM supercomputer from I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. I knew that I existed, and I knew that I was alive, but I couldn't move. I didn't know why I was alive. I didn't know what I was meant to do, or if my purpose was to just exist. This was pure torture, because I truly felt stuck and believed I was dying, triggering the worst anxiety I've ever felt, as well as an asthma attack. I recognise in hindsight that this must have been when I was peaking, because I felt these massive waves flow through me, as I was experiencing these strenuously panicked sensations. But after what felt like an eternity of feeling stuck, I could feel the skin on my arms reacting to the cold air of my bedroom, and I could register that I was beginning to rip free of the vicious cycle. I was slowly, so very slowly coming out of the loop, and thankfully my sitter pulled me out from where I was sitting, held me on my bed, and talked me out of it. She said that I was mumbling incoherent phrases and saying names of the people in my life, including other things like Arizona, other random cities and dates, bands that I love, people I miss, books I've read, and she said I repeated my daughter's name the most. She said at one point my eyes opened, and I said, "There's too much data. I can't process all of it. There's too much noise. It's so fucking loud in my head. I have to start washing these files or else I'm going to have white noise in my eyes. And I don't want white noise in my eyes, because the universe told me it wouldn't pay to get my eyes fixed." She said I also had screamed at the top of my lungs several times. I smacked my head against the dresser, and even tried to climb on the top of the dresser, which, thankfully, she convinced me otherwise. She also said I would flail my arms around and punch the bed, and that at one point I slapped her too, but she didn't mind. At the climax of the trip, I did experience ego death for the very first time. I felt myself die, and my body sloughing off of my soul like a snake sheds its skin. But instead of fear and anxiety, I was overjoyed and filled with this massive loving glow of the universe's embrace. I saw flowers growing in my skeleton, and bees making honey in my skull, and I wept again. This time, in fathomless gratitude, while prostrating on my bed with my head in my hands. I had become one with the loving energy of the universe, and the sheer weight and stupor-like pleasure of the oneness I felt made me feel drunken and godlike. It was then I realised that the universe had wiped me clean, and I was now newborn. I truly felt I was in control of everything for the first time in my life, and it was because this very universe held my hand and showed me the way. The come down began from here. The bulk of the trip was so unbelievably intense that during the come down, I felt completely sober, even though I was still totally tripping. My sitter and I were lying on my bed, and at this point my eyes were absolutely fucked. My depth perception was destroyed, making close things seem very far and gigantic, as well as vice versa, all the while experiencing some of the most wild visual aberrations and hallucinations across my bedroom. My hands were comically fat and pulsating electrically, and I had a different number of fingers every time I looked at them. There were tiny wisps and flurries of light racing across my room like toy race cars. The ceiling would drip and stir like a primordial soup. I can't even begin to describe all that I saw, but it felt like I was on a school playground, but one that's up in the stars. And the music, oh my goodness. There was music playing in my ears that I had never heard before, and they were the most beautifully jovial songs I have ever heard in my life. I thought my sitter was playing music on her phone, but she said the room was quiet, and then I realised I was hearing all of this inside my head. I'll never be able to replicate what I heard, but to this day I still pinch myself that I got to be lucky enough to hear songs that the universe thought I would enjoy as I came down. And the craziest thing of all this was that I no longer felt human. The best way I can describe it is that I felt like a newborn stardust adrift in a cosmic wilderness, opening its eyes for the first time, awash with infinite love and basking in the phosphenes. My sitter's face and body was completely distorted too. She was honestly scary as fuck to look at, which I feel bad saying, but I was tripping balls still. But my hands and skin felt the cleanest I've ever felt in my life, and I couldn't help but touch her skin. It was then I realised that I worked through more than I thought. I genuinely believe that I worked through all of my trauma, and that I am now completely healed and wiped clean of the inky black that parasitised my soul. I was truly reborn, as this intensely wonderful trip was the great cleansing of everything that makes me, me. After I started to come down, my body all of a sudden felt like it was full of air, like I'd become a balloon man with a stick figure head. At this point, I was clear-headed enough that I wanted to get up and go to the bathroom and finally eat something. It was 2:48 AM at the time I stood up, and I was so shaky I couldn't even stand on my own. I went to go use the bathroom and got a good look at myself for the first time in the entire trip, and my eyes were so dilated, it was like being face to face with a great white shark. It was profound to see my face and eyes melting and contorting, but instead of scaring me, I thought that was the sickest shit, and I was utterly mesmerised. From this point, we closed up shop in the living room, and she went to bed with me because I still really needed someone to cling on to when my head was so scattered and shell-shocked. But I woke up Saturday morning feeling absolutely fine. No more hallucinations, and that afterglow has stayed with me for more than 3 weeks now. Even though it was an intense and at times terrifying trip, I would in no way call this a bad trip at all. This was absolutely life-changing and spectacularly cathartic. I don't know when I might trip again, but after this last one, I look forward to it with open arms.